Hi everybody, I'm Jeff,
And I'm Linda.
and we're with Virginia Paranormal Investigations. Today, we're down here at the Eastern Cemetery in Poquoson, Virginia, where just days ago we got an eyewitness account of some paranormal activity here in the graveyard. The witness said that as she was walking by the graveyard, she heard what sounded like sobbing, and as she looked, she saw crouched down behind one of the stones a woman in a velvet cloak. The velvet cloak came up into a hood, which was around her head, making her face all in darkness. And as the spectator watched, the woman rose from the gravestone and came at her at a fast pace.
Yes.
So she took off running, and we came back down here to see if we can find out who this specter is, why this figure was here, and if we can get any evidence of any kind of activity here at the Eastern Cemetery. So let's take a look around and see what we can find.
So we're going back toward the gravestone where the witness said that she saw this woman crouching. And she took a few pictures before she had left the cemetery, and we were able to determine that the headstone looked like a very new headstone, so it probably was not an old gravesite.
And this is the approximate location right here. Now, these tombs do look a bit older than the gravestone itself.
They do. They certainly do. And they're actually not as new as I expected them to be. There's a man and a wife buried here. The husband, named William, it was born in 1884 and died in 1967. His wife, Harriet, was born in 1883 and died in 1965. So it seems that because this is somewhat of a newer gravestone, or a set of gravestones here, that there could be a couple other possibilities here. It could be that from the witness's perspective, it only seemed like the woman in the cloak was crouched down behind this particular grave. The woman could have actually been crouched down behind this grave that's right beside it. And it just so happens that this grave belongs to the same family lineage, but it's a much older one. It's 1835 was the birth date, 1912 was the death date on this one. And as you go further over, this is a family plot here, ringed in by some concrete along the bottom, and you can tell that they get older and older and older. The third one down is born in 1875 and died in 1900, so unfortunately didn't live that long. Now, it also is a possibility that this gravestone that the woman was crouched down behind could have been behind this newer one. So we're going to take a step back here and look at some of the gravestones right behind it and see what else is here. So this one that's back here is William, again, 1873 was the birth date, 1941 the death date. So still not very old, not as old as you would expect for a cloaked figure to be crouched down behind it sobbing. So my theory is that perhaps it was one of the other graves, the older ones that are right beside this one, with the flowers on top where she was supposedly seen. Now, the witness had stated that she had walked around the perimeter of the cemetery, and that's when she had noticed this woman in the cloak crouched down behind the gravestone. Now, when she got back out to the main entrance of the cemetery, that's where she started snapping photographs. So it depends on the perspective that she was looking. If she was out to the other side of the cemetery here, she could have looked over and thought that this cloaked figure was crouching down behind this gravestone when she was actually crouched behind this one, because from the side it would have been difficult to tell. So, but I'd say that this is probably a great place to start a small investigation.
So first thing I want to do is I'm going to do a baseline EMF sweep. I'm going to kind of walk around the graveyard, around this area, and kind of fan out in such a way that I can cover the whole cemetery to see if there's any unusual spikes. I want to cover the whole cemetery just to see, because if there was something here, you don't know where it could have moved to or where it could have been, where it could have originated from. So I want to do this baseline sweep, keeping in mind that it is daytime, it is daylight, and there are people driving up and down the road, which is very near the cemetery here, so I might look a little strange. They might not have any idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to go ahead and begin and just see if we pick up any unusual spikes. And there really shouldn't be any spikes up here. There are a few natural things that could cause a spike, an EMF spike. As far as the first-hand flags that would pop up, I don't see any power lines. There's no power lines near. The main road is a good ways out, and there's power lines out there, but that's not close enough for us to get any spikes on this. So there's really nothing at first glance that should be causing this to spike. So if we do get something, would be reason for further investigation, that's for sure. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start what's called a spirit box session. And spirit box, it's just a radio. It scans through different radio channels, and it's believed that the spirits could potentially communicate through the radio frequency if they are here. Linda's going to put in the headphones. That way she won't hear the questions that I ask, so if she says a related answer, it's not because she was biased by the question at all. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to ask some questions and see if we get any kind of response. So here we go.
Let's get this started.
Meanwhile, I'm going to have the EMF detector going and finishing up the sweep. There was no spikes throughout this graveyard. So if there are any spikes that come through on this, it's not something that was here when I did the baseline sweep. I'm Jeff, this is Linda, and we don't mean to impose. We don't mean to trespass, to be here unwanted by any means. But we'd like to know if there's anybody here with us right now.
Sounded like it said someone else here.
Now we heard there was a woman that was here the other day, and from what we heard, you seem to be upset. Could you tell us who that woman is? Could you tell us how many are here with us?
Gave to heaven.
Could you tell us who you are mourning? Did you maybe lose somebody close to you and you're here visiting them? Could you tell us who the woman was in the velvet cloak? Could you tell us her name? Could you tell us where you're from?
I do.
Could you tell us why you come here? Why do you stay at this place?
The number 2. So in listening to the Spirit Box, I was hearing a lot of things that sounded like they were radio chatter. There were a few things that came through that I was able to understand, but there were also some things that were spoken, particularly by a woman, that sounded like it was very difficult to understand, kind of distant, far in the background, and it was too difficult for me to tell what she was saying. But like I say, at first glance, it was mainly just radio chatter at the time. So it would be interesting to come out here at night if we could, and maybe just see what we could get then.
One interesting thing to note is that on the camera, the battery's almost dead, and it wasn't fully charged when we left, I will say that, but it was near fully charged. It was about 90%. And at 90%, it usually lasts a long time. I mean, I've had this battery on half power last almost an entire investigation before that went 4 or 5 hours. And here we're only out here for a short amount of time, and it's already down in the red. So that's kind of a interesting thing to note, because it's a common belief that spirits do drain the battery power on your electronics sometimes. Now, as far as the cemetery, we tried to look into the history of it, and we really couldn't find much. It's a very small cemetery. It's here in Poquoson, and other than that, we really couldn't find much history on it as far as how old it is or anything like that. Not a single spike on the EMF detector, and it would be interesting, of course, to come back here at night. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that, but it would definitely be a place to revisit. It would be nice to be able to do an EVP session here, but as you can hear from the video, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise because it's daytime, because there's people out here working on something, there's cars driving by, there's a lot of wildlife out in the marsh, which the cemetery backs up to. So we really couldn't do an appropriate EVP session. But you heard the evidence from the Spirit Box session, as much as we could gather from it, which wasn't a whole lot. A lot of the stuff could have been just radio chatter that came through. None of it, I can't say, was a direct response to any of the questions I asked. So unfortunately, I don't think we have enough evidence to say that there's something here at this point in time. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the Eastern Cemetery in Poquoson, Virginia. And the thing with cemeteries, it kind of goes back and forth with opinions of people as to whether or not cemeteries are haunted. A lot of people believe that spirits don't linger in cemeteries, that they go back to places that they're fond of, or places where an emotional event occurred. Now, other people also propose the theory that sometimes spirits are drawn to their body, whether it's out of curiosity or whether it's just the natural attraction of the spirit to the body that causes them to linger around cemeteries. In the case with what was seen here the other day, we can't help but think this may have been the spirit of a mourner.
Yes.
Someone who, their spirit is drawn to this graveside because it's a time where they expressed great emotion, strong sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the possibility that this could have been a real person. We didn't hear any reports of it being transparent or disappearing. Right. However, when the pictures were snapped, the person that took the pictures said that this figure was there when they took the pictures. However, when they showed us the pictures, there was no figure in the pictures.
Right, right.
So, who could this woman have been? Perhaps a mourner.
Perhaps it would have been strange for someone from modern times to be seen wearing a cloak of that type. That seems to be one of the things that was reserved more for the old days.
Right.
Turn of the century kind of thing. And it's also something that you see quite often on witches. There is talk of there being a small coven of witches in this area, in this immediate area. So that's a little bit strange as well, and quite a possibility there.
I guess that is a possibility as well, yes. And like Linda said, wearing the velvet cloak, this would have been the winter wear.
Right.
And it's the right time of year for people of colonial times,
Yes.
or even much later times, the turn of the century, the early 1900s, to don these cloaks.
Yes.
And being a black velvet cloak, this is what they would have worn in
Right.
mourning as well. So we don't know. We don't know. There's also the possibility that we always like to put the skeptical point out there as well, or the skeptical viewpoint, that when people pass by a cemetery, it's dreary, it's death,
Yes.
and it puts you in that mindset where you're thinking of those things, and you're thinking of how eerie it is, and how all the horror movies and ghost stories have spirits lingering in the cemeteries,
Right.
that perhaps people's minds at times could play tricks on them, and they could see something that's not really there.
Yes.
That's a possibility as well.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely some things to keep in mind. Well, thanks for joining us. Until next time, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Linda.